Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Ala. Today I am joined by a guest, Noor, who has her own channel. She talks about Islam. She is a Muslimah, and she talks about topics relating to Islam and Muslims in general. I'll let her introduce herself, and then I'll tell you how the stream is going to be structured. So, without further ado, here you go, Noor. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. First of all,
Of
thank you for
course.
inviting me.
Mhm.
I guess for an introduction, I would say that I am. I primarily focus on tackling extremism because I was once an extremist, and I kind of what I primarily focus on are certain arguments that I find to be really bad. Not necessarily I don't necessarily make any stances. It's more so I try and tackle certain arguments that I find Salafis make and the views that I had as well.
Okay. I'd like to ask, what do you define extremism as? Just, give me what you think of when you say that.
Um, Let me think 1 second.
Sure. And she had asked me when we had a private conversation if that is one of my goals, tackling extremism, or more like she presumes that it is one of my goals, and she's right. It is one of my goals. However, it is more of a primary goal for Noor than it is for me. So while it is on my radar, it's not how it's not how I gear my channel towards it as a goal. But I can talk about that a little more. Yeah.
So I would define extremism as having so much resentment towards the people around you. So like takfir, massive takfir is probably the biggest thing, but also ideas that you want to kill certain people, that certain people are less than you, like this kind of Muslim supremacy that some people have. But more so,
Okay.
I think the root of it, of a lot of extremism, is the takfir that people do.
Okay. Um, I would not necessarily define it that way, but for the purposes of this talk, I guess that makes sense. The way that I would see extremism is, I remember looking up the definition for one of my videos before, and it was something along the lines of following religion or taking an idea to a far enough point where a lot of people don't agree or are harmed by it. It was something along those lines. So we could just go by either of those. And yeah, like I said, it's not a primary goal of mine, though I feel like it's kind of a byproduct, or yeah, it does happen if I get somebody to think. And again, that also isn't the primary goal of mine. It's not geared at Muslims, for example, to get them to question their religion. Not really. But if it does happen sometimes, or people who are in between, or whoever else is watching, if it gets them to change how they think or be more critical in their thought process, usually that results in less extremism, uh, even if they remain Muslim. But I'm guessing your approach is obviously more about keeping it in the religion still, right?
Yeah, because I think that some people, I think a lot of the times, the way that Muslims are extremists is that they already had, let's take homophobia, for example. I think a lot of Muslims who are homophobic were already homophobic before finding out even ayat about Qawm Lut, for example. So I think even if you were to separate Islam from people, I think a lot of the times the root of the extremism is their personal beliefs. So they might just go from being a Muslim to a right wing extremist. Like they'll be Islamophobic, for example. Do you think that there is Islamophobia in the ex Muslim community?
Well, that depends on how you define Islamophobia. So, what does that mean to you?
I would say Islamophobia is a hatred of Muslims,
Okay.
which
I would,
obviously
yeah,
I would,
go
I would
ahead.
also caveat that with a lot of people will say that homophobia is, I mean, Islamophobia is just a hating Islam. The problem, though, is that Muslims are the ones that believe in Islam. So there's a lot of carryover with that. You could not like Islam, and then anyone that follows Islam, likely, that'll follow, you'll not like them as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. And sometimes there is an overlap because it is, Islam is not an entity. So if you were to hate it or be angry at it, for example, what does that actually mean? For some people, they're still looking for a person to personify that Islam, that idea. But I don't like that definition, or I don't. That's not the one that I go by because it's not necessarily one can, and people, a lot of people do dislike Islam, or even sometimes it's not about hating. For example, I can't say I hate Islam because, like I said earlier, what am I really hating here? Am I hating the people? No. And hating Islam is not really productive in my mind because it's just a concept kind of. And then we delve into which Islam, right? That there isn't one true Islam. And in my mind, the one true Islam would be, well, not the one true Islam, the primary Islam would be whatever is followed by the most amount of people, which often happens to tie to the more literal interpretations, whatever the consensus has been for a long time. But I still don't like to call that the Islam, if you know what I mean. So to answer your question, is there Islamophobia in the ex-Muslim communities? So first of all, it's not a coherent community because it's so sparse. So it's hard to generalize it that way. There does happen to be sometimes that kind of anger taken out on Muslims, though I feel like it's exaggerated more often than not. So is the alignment with, for example, the far right, or more specifically, the kind of people who do hate in general brown people, I suppose, or anyone they perceive to be Muslim looking, or specifically Muslims. There is some alignment there, but it's not as prevalent as people make it seem. And there's a lot of people who are vocally against it. I think most vocal ex-Muslims just openly say that they're against that kind of thing. And one other thought I have about that is the small minority who are, lashing out on Muslims, eventually they grow out of that phase. And even if they don't, I feel like their numbers will diminish the more that they see representation and support, and whatever other kind of positive uh, visibility from ex-Muslims, rather than the support that they would get from that kind of person. And I don't want to name names on this stream, but yeah, non-ex-Muslims more often than not, who they just seem like the only safe haven for some of these ex-Muslims. But I hope that changes. Yeah, so let me know your thoughts. Has that answered
So
your
I
question?
guess
Mhm.
this kind of goes into one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, which is it would be like target audience. So I
Mhm.
think with ex-Muslims, sometimes what they get is Islamophobic viewers. They draw in the attention of Islamophobia because you guys are aligned in a sense where it's pretty easy to find, let's say, like Tommy Robinson, for example. Tommy Robinson would say, Muslims, in the Quran, it talks about killing non Muslims. And then an ex Muslim would say, yeah, Muslims want to kill non Muslims. Here's hadith and here's ayat. And if you're ex Muslim, usually you'll go into more sources. So I think sometimes there's an overlap with that ex-Muslim community and the Islamophobic community. Would you agree or not?
Uh, I'm inclined to disagree, and I'll tell you why. Like, that example is a good example. First of all, I'm not familiar with Tommy Robinson, but I just looked him up. But let's
We can use
say,
David Wood as an example. I
yeah,
know that's like a recent thing for you.
yeah. So here's the thing, and this is why I'm careful with my wording and I put disclaimers when I can. The thing about Muslims wanting to kill ex-Muslims, for example, most people haven't pondered the implications of that, but a lot of Muslims, especially outside of the so-called West, I suppose more in Muslim majority countries, are to some level on board with any kind of movement about punishing a certain apostate or heretic or blasphemer or something like that, except they haven't really thought of the implications of it. They wouldn't do it themselves, it's just a kind of mass support. And of course, it does stem from these sources, because if they didn't have these sources, they could be corrected more easily by the Muslims who would disagree with that kind of thing. So it's hard to counter. But that's different than the kind of person who would just cite a verse from the Quran and say, "See, they're told to kill all disbelievers." I don't follow that kind of critique, if you want to call it that. And I see that kind of nuance from most ex-Muslim content creators, but the kind of person that you mentioned, for example, David Wood, even if they don't explicitly say that, even if they don't phrase it that way, a lot of their viewers happen to just jump on board with that kind of narrative, and they don't correct them. So that's why I hope that someday we take attention away from that kind of critic of Islam, and get more attention ourselves, because I think in this example, for example, ex-Muslims being harmed by Muslims is a way bigger issue, or more likely to happen than disbelievers in general being, hunted and killed, as those people would put it. So I make that clear as much as I can. Yeah.
So, what would you say is your overall goal with the channel? Are you just trying to give ex Muslims comfort, or are you trying to um, convert, quote unquote,
Or
Muslims into
I guess.
like de
Mhm.
religionize, demuslify Muslims, or are you just trying to give a safe haven?
So it's a bunch of different things, but deconverting Muslims is not one of my goals. It does happen, but it's not, the intention behind the videos. And so I do get reached out to by people who said they already had doubts, and then seeing this kind of thing validated did help them take that step. Or some people who said it got them thinking, and then they took that step, and they ended up leaving Islam. But that's not the primary goal, because and I see that coming as a criticism from some ex-Muslims or some kind of supporters who want to see the numbers grow of people leaving Islam, for example. And they tell me that my approach is not as direct as can be. Like if I'm having a conversation like this, they would want me to corner someone like you and say, "What about this verse? What about this hadith?" and so on and so forth. And I don't think that is productive, because I think it's more productive to get people thinking, um, like themselves from their own volition after they come across whatever I'm saying. And also, that is still not my primary target. It's not deconversion through critical thought. As you said it, having a safe space for ex-Muslims is one of those goals, because I still get that a lot. They tell me that they're glad to be able to see this spoken about, to see a representation, especially when and I touched on this in my last videos about the whole David Wood thing. There are ex-Muslims or doubting Muslims or whatever you want to call it, who were thrown off by this kind of more hostile approach with hostile supporters, and it made them suffer even more. And they couldn't just simply just put their doubts aside and return to Islam. That wasn't an option, so they were in between. So yeah, that is a very big goal of mine. And another one is just normalizing this kind of conversation in whatever tone, but I don't like to take a hostile tone. But I still, for example, blaspheme and make jokes because I think it's necessary and relevant, but not in an antagonistic way on purpose, if that makes sense.
So
But by the way,
I guess like
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. So like I guess my question would be like when you make videos about oh why does Allah say this in the Quran? That seems pretty stupid. You know, the idea of Allah, it seems pretty dumb. Are you is your goal with that to try and show Muslims that their religion is dumb, or are you trying to just like do like a group ridicule with other ex-Muslims who just happen to agree with you? Or are you trying to
Um,
go for the people in between and make them doubt their religion?
Somehow none of the three. So it's not about group ridiculing and having people agree with me, because I'm still open to people in that case telling me, no, you missed that interpretation or you're misunderstanding it that way. And either I would, I think actually they have a point, or I disagree, but that's that. Um, and it's not about me trying to get just an echo chamber of people agreeing with me. However, there's so many people who've never seen that thought being talked about publicly. Like some of these angles, I'm surprised that I haven't heard them before, even though they're pretty obvious. That the ridiculousness of a certain story or another. And there's so many people who aren't aware that the ridiculousness of it, them thinking of that, it doesn't make them defective, but they're made to feel defective either by the religion itself in whatever interpretation of it, or the people who follow it. So that does help them out a lot. And since it hasn't been put out there, or not in the way that I would put it, then I feel like there's a need for it.
When you say defective, what do you mean by that?
So defective, let me say, if, for example, uh, the idea is repeated a lot in the Quran that those who disbelieve are their hearts and basically their minds are sealed, or God does seal them, or they're called all sorts of things about not being able to think, not being able to feel, or often sometimes even more direct things like they're misers, like they're the worst of people, and so on. And if someone is in between, or if someone is a Muslim and they have some of these thoughts, or an ex-Muslim and they have some of these thoughts, they might actually believe something is wrong with me, as Allah keeps saying here. Why am I not able to get rid of this idea that there's something bizarre about the story, and so on. And by the way, sorry if I'm talking a lot. I think part of why you wanted to do this is you wanted to ask me questions, so feel free to stop me at any time. And I do have some questions for you later.
Yeah, I mean, this is your channel. It's fine. You run the show.
No, it doesn't mean that I would talk more than everybody else, but yeah, I'm just trying to answer the questions with as much detail as you would hope for.
I mean, I've never been an ex-Muslim, and I don't even know if really any of my doubts have been. I guess what you're saying is that people have doubts so much so that they get like depressed. Is that true?
That's part of it, yeah. Or they don't realize that it's not only normal to have these doubts, whether they remain a Muslim or not, that other people do have these doubts, because they would think only they thought that.
Okay. I mean, I guess in that case, if they really do get so troubled by, let's say, shubuhat, then I guess some people who are like validating their questioning does seem to be good. However, I guess I would ask, do you think that it's more effective, less effective, or just as effective if a Muslim were to talk about those doubts as well? Instead of having an avenue for ex-Muslims, having an avenue for Muslims to answer the same questions.
Very good question. Um, I want to answer that, but before, I want to highlight this comment by Ahmed. By the way, Ahmed, that's way too generous of you. Thank you very much for the super chat. But he's saying, I haven't read the comment yet, but he's saying people like Alauddin voice the things we are not able to voice ourselves. In our difficult journey away from Islam, it becomes valuable sounding board in a community that can make you feel alone. Sounding board, I'm not sure I understand that, but yeah, so that's how a lot of ex-Muslims feel about it. So you were saying, is it um, is it more effective than the approach of? Sorry, can you repeat that part? Is it more or less effective than what approach?
Then, if Muslims were to address the doubts as well,
Okay, so here's the thing: effective with what goal? Like at putting those people's minds at ease? Is that what you mean?
yeah, I think from what I've heard, that's the issue is that people get so troubled and emotionally like distressed from that.
So that depends, because if that's solely the outcome that you're looking for, then I would still say I don't know the numbers, to be honest. I can't say, but I don't think it's a one or the other approach. The approach of a Muslim answering those doubts is already happening all around us, right? It's not like it's taboo to talk about these things. I mean, before I guess it wasn't in the mainstream that Muslims would address shubahat to begin with, but now it is, and nothing's holding that back. So whether it's effective or not, it's already happening. However, I think it's not very effective because if it was, like, I personally would have remained a Muslim, right? If it was, then there wouldn't be these shubuhat anymore. There's this narrative that people are trying to scrutinize Islam unfairly, or that how come no one of the prophets, people of the prophet's time, didn't scrutinize this or that, but people are doing it now. It's because we know better about humanity, and we have a broader context to judge it by. Um, and what was I going to say? Yeah, so to me, it's not an option for a lot of people to just, the Muslims addressing those shubahat and those issues. It's not really going to do it for them. And even if they address one or two, there's so many that keep popping up. So it's good for them to have another option, right? And it doesn't have to be one or the other. Like, that ties into your approach, and I want to ask you about that. And by the way, everybody who sends comments, I try to answer them when it's not interrupting the flow, but I do get to them often. Thank you very much, Benjamin. They say, I saw Noor's videos on qira'at before discovering Alauddin. I haven't watched that one yet. And
By the way,
Prophet is here. Sorry,
I
go
would
ahead.
like to say that I don't really like that comment, just because it kind of implies that I'm like a gateway towards being an ex-Muslim, which is not really like the
Uh, I would like
portrayal
them
that I
to
want.
clarify then. I didn't read it that way, but Benjamin, please feel free to clarify. Um, and Apostle Prophet is here. Thank you very much for the super chat. And it's nice to know that you tune into my videos, or some of my videos and live streams. I really appreciate that. Um, I wanted to just read a couple of comments before I let you, share your thoughts about that. Let's see. Well, we're not going to disclose anything like that. Please don't ask about, personal information. And Zagros was saying, you actively think about these issues and work on refining your arguments. Many don't know how to do that or where to begin once questions arise in their heads. Um, well, thank you for the comment. I'm wary of calling them arguments per se, because I'm not trying to argue what has not been proven, or argue against what has not been proven. But whatever it is that you meant, I get the gist of it. Yeah, and Benjamin was saying that the Muslims who try to address these things from the within, they are often dismissive with difficult questions. It's not always the case. And I think that those who have good intentions and do actually hear you out, um, they still, even if their attitude is good, they won't necessarily, or probably often can't address them. Anyway, we'll get back to you, Noor. Well, what do you think?
So, if I'm being honest, just like how in your video you talked about how when you were a Muslim, you watched David Wood's video and was just like so dismissive. You're like, oh, this white guy is talking about Islam. What does he have? What does he know? I think for Muslim. Oh, if you wanted to say something about that.
It's just that the white guy phrasing. So I did explain what I meant for people, who haven't seen that, but I wish I put that in the main video as well. But yeah, continue on.
I think with Muslims, when they have these doubts, I think sometimes, or just Muslims in general, they'll watch an ex-Muslim and then be already so dismissive. Oh, this guy's ex-Muslim. He has a huge agenda. He's not going to know anything. So I think, like with me, I try and take the approach where I'm trying to tackle these issues within the Muslim community. So like they're already, more, well, they'll be less dismissive. And I think even like progressive Muslims do that poorly as well, because like when you take a Muslim, like an average Muslim, and just say like, oh, dismiss all hadith, the first thing they're going to do is they say, "Oh, you're like a weird group. You're not really Muslim."
Mhm.
What would you say about do you think Muslims watch your videos and give them the time of day, or do you think with Muslims they'll have more of better reaction to these doubts?
So, few thoughts I have about that. First of all, yes, they do. I don't know in what numbers, but it's more than I would think because it's for me, if something's out of sight, then it's kind of out of mind. So I don't think about it often if I don't see a lot of comments from Muslims, for example. But I do get the occasional message about it, and I try to read messages when I can. And I also get I see how a lot of the people who watch my stuff aren't subscribed, and part of it is because either like they're scared they don't want that to be found out, and they are closeted ex-Muslim or questioning or something, and part of it is because they don't really want to support my channel that way, but they're curious Muslims, or they're curious in a way that they want to, yeah, I don't know, oppose me, but sometimes they still are receptive to some extent. Um, and like I said, that's not my primary target. So it's not that it's one or the other. The Muslims can continue doing their thing, and if an ex-Muslim, or sorry, if a Muslim is kind of repulsed by seeing me talking about it, and they're not going to be receptive to it, then it is what it is. Um, and since it's not my primary goal, that doesn't bother me, if that makes sense.
So are you saying that? Sorry. So are you saying that you want Muslim channels to address the same doubts that you're addressing, so that they can have alternative views?
I mean, they already are, right? Are
Would you
are you
would you
asking me?
would you
Mhm.
advocate for other Muslims to do the same?
Um, Here's the thing about it though. Because of at the core of it, I believe that what they're doing is, as some people might try to point out, what they're doing is trying to make sense of something, I think, poorly, and trying to patch it up. And because I think that that's not, at the end of the day, it's not a truth, right? They're not speaking the truth. They're just poorly trying to make it a better thing. I mean, they may have good intentions, but because of the inconsistency in the methodology, and because it doesn't seem feasible that it's actually that effective, I wouldn't encourage it. But I'm not doing anything to stop it.
What do you mean by truth? Like, not in like the philosophical way, but like in your example,
Mhm.
like, are you saying like they're, I guess the term would be like watering down, or are they trying to cover up for like, do like taqiyya? Is that what you're saying, or what do you mean by that?
No, no, I don't think I don't subscribe to that definition of taqiyya that's not found in Islam, I believe, which is lying in favor of Islam, kind of. I do think that there's some PR and that kind of definition of taqiyya, but it's not Islamically prescribed or anything. But that's not necessarily what I mean. I mean that there's inconsistencies in those explanations that try to make sense of either the ugly or the nonsensical or the contradictory, and because they're inconsistent, and I don't think they can, like, if I thought that they actually answered the doubts, then I wouldn't be here. So I wouldn't advocate for something actively that is just a temporary solution, if a solution at all, and is not. Um, Let me say this, intentionally or not, it's not intellectually honest, in my opinion. So that's what I think.
So, do you think that Muslim arguments for certain shubuhat are inherently inconsistent, inherently quote unquote bad? Do you think that ex Muslim arguments are superior in a sense, or can there be both answers?
So I wouldn't pit it that way, one against the other, because, like I said before, I have this idea that whatever has not been proven does not need to be disproven with an argument. So, in my view, and objectively to the rest of the world, Islam has never been proven. Otherwise, I think everyone following the scientific method and even deductive reasoning philosophy or something would follow Islam. Like it's just, if it's that provable, but it's not. So it's not like there's an argument that is um, better because it's trying to present a certain narrative. It's that's the default, that Islam is not the truth, and the inconsistencies are, that's the easiest explanation, that they're just inconsistencies and flaws because of it being man-made. Um, so that's why I wouldn't pit it as one against the other. But do I think that most apologetics, or a lot of them, are poor or bad, as you put it? Yes, I agree with that.
Yeah, and also I think like sometimes being consistent isn't necessarily the best avenue, because like someone can have a shubha like, oh, why do I feel bad, or let's say like, why are Muslims suffering in the world? Like you can go like an extremist route and say, oh, the reason why Muslims are suffering in the world is because you haven't waged a holy war against the non-Muslims in order to establish a khilafah. If you do that, then your life will be good. So I think sometimes certain arguments aren't necessarily beneficial, and I think having alternative views are a good thing, if that makes
Well,
sense.
and that example is not really what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, and I don't want to mention specifics because I don't want to make this talk about specific
Yeah, yeah.
examples, but just something where there's an inconsistency and you can see that the consistent way is the problematic way, and the apologetics are trying to kind of soften the blow. Um, or, for example, a lot of Islam's views on women, many say that it's culture and so on, but even if we go down to the verses, to the, like, the very clear cut distinctions here, the apologetics become, well, that's because at the time that was necessary and so on, which can still be argued against, and also doesn't address the broader issue, which is, for this time and all time and so on. So what you said about their having differing views is good. I somewhat agree with that. I mean, if a Muslim does believe in these apologetics and the end result is they hold on to an inconsistent religion, but at the same time they don't hold on to the extremist, or as you would call it, extremist or harmful interpretation, then that's fine by me. I'm not going to go and convince them to leave Islam, but I wouldn't actively help or advocate for apologetics because they don't even need me to help or advocate for them. They're already going on. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking about.
Mm.
If they come to the same conclusion as you, are you satisfied?
Yeah, in the sense that, like, I don't have to go and try to convince them that they're wrong. However, say I address that inconsistency in a dissecting apologetics stream, for example, I think that is still necessary because it's not just simply harmless. That, okay, it's the issues patched up, and the Muslims with good intentions, or not even good intentions, the Muslims who want to believe in the good interpretation will take it, and that's fine. But there's a lot of Muslims who don't want to believe in, or they don't believe in the good interpretation, and or they see in the inconsistency, and this causes confusion and harm, and they might either turn to extremism because it makes more sense to stick to the meaning of the words, or they'll just remain in limbo and be, tortured by this. So that's why I feel like they still have to be addressed. But I don't go to Muslims and say, this is why you're wrong and you should turn to my way. But I do have the right, and I think responsibility, to address those who are sometimes even deceptive about what information they choose to present to make this apologetic point, and sometimes intentionally deceptive. Like, there's no way they haven't thought it through or seen the things that disprove what they said. Um, and I want to ask you before we go on, how do you combat extremism, and what do you think about the way that or the way that works from my point of view?
I I'm kind of similar to you in that I don't necessarily think I have to prove much, because I think extremism is inherently inconsistent. Inherently, it doesn't make sense inherently. And I think, if I'm being honest, I don't think that I don't even think I'm very effective at combating extremism. My goal is mostly focused towards the center. You know, a standard deviation would mean that, 95% of people are not really going to change their views. So I'm more so focused on the 2.5% of people who would change their views. And I think just by showing an alternative view while still being Muslim is easier for people to go away from extremism. And I think a lot of ex Muslims actually push people towards extremism in a sense just because they might hear a shubha for the first time from an ex Muslim. Then they'll go to extremist avenues, find out the arguments for that, and be more convinced that way. But
Well,
I think for
sorry, go ahead.
you, people in the middle, I think you and I think we have a similar impact.
Okay. I wouldn't be offended, by the way, if you say that you think my approach is part of the harmful approach. I still want to hear about that, but it's good to know. A few things came to mind as you were talking. First of all, I applaud your awareness, your self-awareness. You said that you don't think your approach would be effective at combating um, extremism, but you're working on those who are in between because that's the majority of people anyway, right? So I applaud you for being aware of that, and that would help you tune your approach, I think. Um, and two things. So you said that extremism is inconsistent. I I can't generalize and say that because often extremism I'm not going to say often. In many instances, extremism is kind of consistent with the most obvious interpretations that don't take a lot of twisting and relying on secondary and tertiary sources and so on. But also that speaks to the larger nature of a lot of religions, including Islam. I think there's so much room for interpreting it one thing one way or another. Like I see this happen often where somebody, an apologist, would cite a verse about don't do harm or something generic like that and say it goes against something, a harmful interpretation of something else completely. And I think that's not really, either they are right, those two things do go against each other, but also they're not considering the context and what that harm means. Like sometimes harm is just a byproduct in Islam. It's considered fine because it's for the greater good of something else. Not to say that there's some kind of conspiracy or that's not what I'm alluding to here, but um, the object, like the view of what is moral, for example, a disbeliever is worse in the eyes of Allah than a thief, a murderer Muslim. Whether they repent or not, they still have that baseline of someday they might go to heaven after all the torture, or at least they have this upper hand. So, in that sense, it falls apart, this whole idea that Islam is fair and things like that. So, my point here
Can I just
is sure.
push you on that real quickly? I don't actually agree that extremism is easy. I actually think it's a lot harder, and I'll just give two reasons why. The first is, I mean, just hearing extremists talk, they don't actually just like quote one verse. They'll like jump from like place to place, books to books, even like certain centuries apart to try and form a
But
narrative.
that's what apologists do, though, like jump between books and centuries.
Uh, Not as, I mean, to an extent, but I'm just saying like to
Mhm.
try and oversimplify extremism as like, oh, it's actually very easy to be an extremist. I don't necessarily think so.
I mean,
And
and that's not exactly what I said. Just to be clear, I'm saying in many cases, it can be easy to justify it, and the inconsistency is clearer or easier to solve through the what you would consider an extremist interpretation. Doesn't mean that it's always the easy one, and that's I'm saying Islam is always going to be what you consider the extremist interpretation.
I guess so, but I would just say like I would appeal to the masses, even though it is fallacious. The majority of Muslims aren't. I wouldn't say have extremist views. So if it really was easy, then why is extremism so
Well,
minuscule?
here's where we might disagree. So, what you consider to be extremism, that's, for example, the view that blasphemers. That's a very easy example. Blasphemers should be punished. Most Muslims believe yes, and in many different degrees of punishment. That could be considered an extremist view to an outsider, and perhaps even maybe to you, but that is the majority case in the Muslim world. Or something else. There's a lot of these examples of something that within the Muslim community is not extremism, but from an outsider's point of view, it's absolutely an infringement of human rights or women's rights or whatever else. So that's where I disagree. I don't say most Muslims are extremists, but there's a lot in Islam that is normal that isn't actually normal, you know?
It's possible. I mean, I guess like it's possible that depending upon certain examples, you might find it more or less common. I'd say with blasphemy, I don't actually know what if it's more or less, but I think with that specific example, I don't know. I mean, obviously I'm from the West, so I don't really. And even then, I'm from America, which is it's very unique. I don't really think that we have. I think if you were to ask most Muslims here, at least, I don't think they would have favorable views of blasphemy, but I don't think they would ascribe themselves to an extremist view. I think with that example, an
Well,
extremist,
just to interject, does it
sure,
matter if they call themselves extremists or the rest of their views extremist? Because that still affects people, that one opinion. Or you mentioned homophobia, for example. That's a closer to home kind of
true, yeah,
example, or like a simpler example.
yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, please continue.
I think yeah. I guess just in general, I think there are certain views that are extremists that are more common. I think there are less. There are other things that are less common, like less extremist things that are common.
Okay. Well, I want to mention something. You said that some ex-Muslims, or maybe most, I'm not sure, would could push Muslims to become extremists. I see where you're coming from because I get that sometimes people say so. For example, do you want Muslims to interpret it as beat your wife, for example? No, I don't want that. And I don't think that the majority influence would be pushing people towards applying that interpretation. It would be pushing them towards realizing that this is the obvious interpretation that had been applied to varying degrees, and that that is a problem, that they do conflict with it morally, and they should do something about that. They can still continue to have the apologetic interpretation, and I hope that they do, or they would realize that there's a bigger problem afoot here. Um, so I don't think it's pushing people to extremism. I would disagree.
Um, yeah, I think so. I think there are some ex-Muslims though that are anti-apologetic responses. For you, what
Mhm.
you said earlier is that if they come to the same conclusion, then it's fine. I think some ex-Muslims do what they would say. Oh, but that's not what your scholars say, as if trying to adhere to a true Islam is more important than the conclusions that someone comes to.
Well, two things come to mind here. First of all, I would still, like I said, I would still address the source of the apologetics because they get away with so many other things that they say. So exposing the intellectual dishonesty, intentional or not, or the fallacies in what they're saying is important because it takes away from their credibility, spreading everything else that I'm not addressing, some of it harmful. And the second thought about that is, I hope I don't forget it. Sorry, can you repeat what you just said?
Um, that there are some ex-Muslims who try and make Muslims follow what scholars say. They'll say like,
Got
"Oh,
it.
but that's not what your scholars believe."
Right. So it's not that they're trying to make people think that. I think they're just peeved by when the thing is, when a Muslim takes the apologetic interpretation, they often phrase it as the obvious truth, and that the other person is ignorant and that they're hateful, and it comes with a lot of more connotations when the other person is, I'm not saying it's perfect the way that they would do it, and it does happen that they're aggressive in their demeanor and their approach, but their mindset is, how could you be accusing me when it's as obvious as the sun that you're really trying to patch this up? And coming from a position of, being of a lower status minority and an oppressed minority among Muslims, it of course it's bothersome when they spread it as if that's the norm, especially when these apologetics are usually outward facing, or they're more common in more progressive societies or societies that are intertwined with non-Muslims. So they're dismissing the reality of it happening in the Muslim world and the reality of it happening in Muslim communities within these like these pockets within these secular countries as well. So that dismissive, condescending kind of tone to it, like you have no idea how often I've been told since day one on TikTok, for example, by even by young Muslims, how I'm such an idiot, and if only I had looked into it for 1 minute, I would realize so and so interpretation, which I had way before I left Islam. Um, so that's the aggravating part behind it.
Yeah, there's some Muslim speakers who say like, oh, all ex-Muslims they leave for emotional reasons or something like that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
that
it
is.
would
Yeah.
mostly depend on who is the aggressor. I guess so. Like ex-Muslims and Muslims really shouldn't belittle other people. Even the Quran says to not ridicule the non-Muslims who speak badly about Allah. I think you're right. Yeah.
See, that's what I'm talking about with the inconsistency of Islam for in this case, because there are other verses that one could point to where Allah Himself, like allegedly Allah Himself, is doing that, talking down to disbelievers and promising, like, is there anything worse than saying that they're the worst of people and they deserve like the worst of hell forever? I think another verse or more talking about how you should just let them. I maybe I'm misquoting this, but I wasn't it about like don't talk, don't get into these like heated insults and debates because they will end up insulting Allah and your religion, something like that. But my point is, you can go either way with the same text, like with the same book.
I think it more so has to deal with. I
Sorry,
think
your voice cut
like
out.
what I sorry. I think like I said earlier, I think it has to do with people's preconceived notions and then working backwards to try and justify. So if someone is already kind of like an arrogant, pompous person, I think it's easier to go towards certain verses where they insult other religions and and say, "Oh, you're an idiot. Christianity doesn't make sense. Three in one. Even Allah says that doesn't make sense." Um, yeah, I think it depends on the person more so than working backwards to justify.
I do have one issue with that though, because I feel like it's kind of scapegoating humans' imperfection. And sometimes I see that done more directly, saying, Islam is perfect, Muslims are not, and so on. And yes, you are right that when someone is predisposed to be arrogant or rude and they find confirmation of it, they're going to stick to it. And it goes on both sides. Like there are ex-Muslims who, take these inconsistencies and problems as kind of cannon fodder, as they say, or as ammunition, and they just go and apply it in a way to win as much as possible. But I think that certain ideologies or groups of ideas or religions or political systems enable that kind of arrogance more than others, or even induce it in many ways. Like when Muslims feel like they're under attack by everybody, including ex-Muslims, they're more likely to be hostile in that way, and turn towards the interpretation that confirms, see, Allah said they are the worst of people. Look at them, they are the worst of people, and things like that. So that's where I disagree. And by the way, just want to remind you, like, of your time constraints. Tell me how much more time we have before you have to go.
I think we can stay on for a bit longer. So it's
Okay.
fine. Unless you want to kick me out,
No, no,
that's
no,
fine.
no. We're good. I just want to know to make sure that we get through as much as possible,
Yeah.
or how to phrase it towards the end, I guess.
I think you're right. I think it might be easier for a Muslim to. I think some ideologies are easier to um, be more hostile than other ideologies. Even something like communism and capitalism. I think communism is more negative towards people, whereas capitalism is kind of neutral. So you can't really be like anti. It's harder to be anti something if your ideology doesn't really say anything negative about other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not going to comment on the
That's
political
fine.
side of it just because no really thoughts there. Yeah, yeah, and this is why I'm wary of, for example, when people say Islam is evil. I'm wary of using that phrasing because of, like you mentioned earlier, that has the connotation that Muslims are evil, right? Um, in my view, Islam has a lot of potential for that kind of harm, and often it's realized to varying extents. Like, could be as benign as, or not really benign in effect, but as normal as being homophobic, or could be as violent as, physical violence and extremism and so on. And I think that only focusing on the very extreme side of it dismisses everything else. So calling it evil or violent alone doesn't help in today's day and age. Um, so that, yeah, just a random thought about that.
Um, yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think sometimes pointing out extremism can make other Muslims, like more centrist Muslims, more apprehensive and less likely to go towards that avenue, just because they already, it's already a no-go for them. And then from there, once the average Muslim already has negative views about extremist views, it's probably easier to, the smaller extremist views that most Muslims have, it's probably easier to like make those go away once they already, have such negative views about extremists. If that makes sense, kind of like reforming centrist Muslims. It's probably easier once there's already such a negative connotation with extremists. Because
Yeah,
right now, I think right now in the Muslim community, sometimes extremism is like it's a big aesthetic, and sometimes it can be seen as more religious and something that
mhm.
like to aspire. And I think that we need to work towards moving away
I
from
think
that.
fundamentalism more than extremism. Fundamentalism in the sense of trying to adhere to the religion as close as possible to, like, the literal interpretations as close as possible, like dedicating most of your day to prayer and doing everything that the prophet does to a T, to the point that you oppose the anything else. And yeah, I don't know, would that be considered fundamentalism or extremism? I don't know, but that's what I see.
I mean, yeah, there's hadith that mentions that like there will be people who do salah and it looks better than yours, kind of that aesthetic look of piety and being more religious. But
Mhm,
their religion doesn't go past their throats or whatever. I think sometimes we need to move towards that and kind of be more centrist.
mhm. And
So I guess that kind of goes towards my question, like how much of an impact do you want to have? Do you want Muslims to be centrists, or would you advocate towards Muslims being less centrist? What would you say? Or are you not even, or you don't even care about Muslims in the sense that you mostly just care about ex-Muslims and having them be more protected?
so that's a very good question. No, it's not that I don't care about Muslims. If anything, I feel like this is also important for Muslims. Even if, say that they don't agree with me, right? That I bring up a point and somebody thinks critically and finds an apologetic interpretation that is very convincing, even if I disagree with it. And if it ends up, being a net positive for Muslims, um, it is what it is. That's good. At least they're leaving with a decent, um, end product, kind of. And that's good. That was kind of brought on by this discussion about the topic, which many years ago, if no one was criticizing Islam, then and even talking about from within, like the progressives or reformists or the thinkers who try to talk about these topics, not to disprove Islam or anything, but to talk about how it doesn't make sense and they need to find something that makes sense or that's less harmful and so on. They were always opposed. So finding sources that are harder to oppose, as in harder to silence in that sense, is going to be a positive even for those centrists, I think, because now at least the conversation has started and people are more interested in the conversation, in a sense, when they feel like it's an attack against their religion. So I think that's a positive, from your point of view, a positive side effect. Or if I'm looking at it from your point of view, I would see it as a positive effect. And sorry, can you repeat that again? My brain today is not great. What was the first part of that question?
To be honest, I don't really remember. It's mostly just like, what kind of impact do you want? Do you mostly just care about certain views and you don't want anyone to hold these views, or is it more so specific? Like you just want ex-Muslims to be safe, and you don't really care about Muslims if whether or not they're still Muslim or if they convert or whatever,
Mhm.
or devert.
So for me, it's a tiered, like it's several tiers of caring, or not just caring, of things that I can prioritize. So there's no way that I can prioritize all of that at the same time, and there's no way that I can actively support and enhance, for example, apologetic arguments to make Muslims more centrist. If there was, I would be that kind of Muslim. I wouldn't be here, right? Um, so I don't care at the end of the day if they remain Muslim, as long as they leave with a positive conclusion. I do care about, when they remain Muslim, that they don't see that they do see the inconsistency and the totally logical, rational conclusion of the person who disagrees with them, because that would help them not be as hostile or as opposing to them. But often that is not the case. And once they find their centrist position, there's still that hostility. Like, how dare the other person not realize that this is a very sensible position to have? Because at the end of the day, I think that the centrist position is still inconsistent, and it will always have flaws. And that's why, otherwise I would have believed in it. So it's kind of an in between step, I think, where the eventual destination, it's not that I'm saying will happen or that that's my goal, but I feel like people are going to just eventually move away from religion in general. And that doesn't mean that the world is going to be free of issues, but um, I don't think religion can withstand the test of time further. There will still be Muslims, there will still be Christians, and it'll always be that case, but I feel like it'll wither away. Um, and maybe something will happen in the future and things will revert back again, and religions will be on the rise and so on. But I think that's kind of inevitable that they will drop. So, um, so yeah, in my case, my approach is to, first of all, make sure that the ex-Muslims realize they're not alone. Because, like I said, I am amazed that some of the things that I'm saying just aren't not common knowledge, but aren't commonly known or talked about or discussed, or a point of view that no one's expressed before, or not a lot of people have expressed before, at least not in public circles. So being able to do that is, in my opinion, a positive thing. So yeah, primarily it is to give that space for people to think, and including Muslims as well, who want to have that discussion and present to ex-Muslims, or those that you would call Islamophobic, like the more hateful people, that no, Muslims are not, at the end of the day, just lying to force the bad interpretation down your throat later. They genuinely believe this, and this is why they believe it. So giving them a space to express that is good for everybody as well. Yeah, so I hope that answers that.
Yeah, I think so. What would you? Okay, let me ask you: is there ever? Do you envision you ever making a video or videos debunking ex-Muslim videos where you think that they are pushing a false narrative, or they're misrepresenting things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, at the moment, I can't think of anything like that, especially on a scale where it got my attention, and I feel like it's big enough that it needs to be talked about. Um, at the moment, I can't think of any examples. If you do want to present an example, that would be interesting. I might not delve into it right now, but I'd like to know. Uh, However, yeah, when the need for it comes, I'll have to assess how urgent that is and how much harm does it cause Muslims and ex-Muslims and everybody else, um, compared to whatever it is that I'm currently working on. Because I've got a lot going on, and just because I'm not doing something doesn't mean that I don't care about it, or that, please, like, nobody presume my position just because I'm not talking about something. So I want to make that clear. But yeah, I could see myself doing that. I think I I'm trying to continue to prove that it's not necessarily that I don't like conforming, but I'm not afraid to just speak my truth in a sense. And if I truly am convinced that this is a bad narrative that someone is spreading, I will talk about it. It doesn't matter if they're ex-Muslim or Muslim. So yeah, calling out my own people, I suppose, if people want to phrase it that way.
All right, I think that's it.
Yeah. Let me go through the list, see if there was something else that you wanted to ask. So you asked me a couple more things, such as, um, do I provide the discord that others don't, and am I unique, or what makes me unique if I am unique? Am I phrasing that right? Is that what you asked?
Yeah, I think you answered that, saying that there are certain questions that you don't find any even ex-Muslims talk about.
Yeah, and sometimes it's not that, it's not specifically about a certain flaw or anything, but just an alternative view of something that can never be proven one way or another. Like, for example, opinion pieces, like the one that I had about how shaitan causes extremism. It's a video that I'm actually seeing on my screen right now, and that's not proof of anything or disproving anything. That's just my opinion on how pushing the narrative that the shaitan is behind your doubts, and there's a whisper there that will cause extremism in some cases. It's not the root of extremism, and so on. So something like that, I think, if no one has talked about it from that angle, then I suppose that wouldn't harm, for me to talk about it. If anything, sometimes it's necessary or productive. Um, but I wouldn't say that I'm unique. Like, when you asked that question, I didn't answer really anything in the emails, but what I think about that is I don't want to say I am unique. I think that a lot of people are unique in that sense. A lot of people bring things to the table. So phrasing it as me being unique means, the one person standing out, or that there's something extremely special here. Um, we've all got our different flavors and approaches, and um, if there was someone who was exactly like me, for example, there might still be a need for me to, or I would feel like there's a need for me to do this still, because that still expands the reach. However, if I were an ex-Christian, for example, and I had the same kind of journey or a similar journey and the same thoughts, I probably wouldn't be here. Like, part of why I'm here is because there aren't enough people here. Um, but there's more than enough ex-Christians speaking up, and that's not me saying they shouldn't be, or don't start an ex-Christian channel or something like that. But I personally would feel a lot less responsibility and the urge to do it myself. So that's part of why, to answer your question about uniqueness, whether I am unique or not, there is a gap that needs to be filled here. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, any follow-ups on that?
No, I was just wondering your view. I mean, yeah, I think that it's a pretty small niche compared to like ex-Christian channels. So I guess I mean, there's always something that you can talk about, and there's always a different, like if Apostate Prophet made a video, there's probably something that he missed out that I'm sure that you could talk about as well. So that's
I
fine.
think there's a lot of ex-Muslim YouTubers, when it comes to the context of, for example, factual things about Islam, or critique, or pointing out flaws and things like that. They're very well researched, and eh, it's not that, like, I feel like it's unlikely that I would uncover something new. However, sometimes there are angles that, like, they are responding to an apologetic point that started off with a fallacy because of a mistranslation. Sometimes I'm surprised that, it hasn't been pointed out, but I don't blame them for not noticing it. And sometimes it's just beyond the factual critique of these things. Sometimes it's just, like I said, like opinion pieces like that. So yeah, and You had also asked how much of an impact do I have or will I have in the future? Those two things. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to measure that. I mean, one way is obviously like a subscriber count because I think that like I think Apostate Prophet has more of an impact than you do, just merely
Mhm.
based off of the reach that he has. But I guess like if you were to like expand it, would you want the entirety of the Middle East to stop being Muslim countries? Like, is that an example of something that you'd like to have?
A couple of thoughts here. Well, first of all, I want to point out, why is it that you bring up Apostle Prophet? Is it because like he's your typical example of a vocal ex-Muslim?
I think he's probably one of the largest, and also he was
Okay.
on the stream earlier. Nothing,
Okay.
nothing
Fair
personal.
enough.
It's not that you guys
Yeah,
both
yeah.
have apostate in your name. I
No,
know
I
you don't
wasn't
like that.
accusing you of anything. I just wanted to point out because some people seem to think that we're like at odds or that it's this versus that. Um, so yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. And you said, so in terms of impact, do I hope, for example, that most of the Middle East would stop being Muslim countries? So those are two separate questions because are you saying because of my impact, or are you saying my impact would contribute to that? Uh, is that what you're asking?
I mean, I assume that is your focus just on an English speaking audience? Even obviously, I mean, I know you make
Mhm.
videos in English, but are you just focused on having the English speaking audience be less extreme, or do you plan on this to be a norm for all of the world?
So I do have some reasons that I can't explicitly mention about why I make content in English only, and but one of the important reasons is because there are already people doing it in the Arabic-speaking world, and they will continue. And I hope they have more people doing it. It's not that it's saturated, and I don't have a place there. I think I could still fit in there, and there is a gap that I might be able to fill there, even in the Arabic speaking world. However, I feel like there's a more urgent need for that in the English speaking world, for that in betweener person. Um, I think because I can bring some perspective from having been there and among those people, because it's sometimes it's harder to view it from that point of view if you're already outside, or you've never been in that environment. And yeah, and the language thing is also helpful to pick out things that are not that I'm an expert on Arabic or anything, and I don't like it when people pose it that way. I can still make mistakes, but being able to read what the experts on Arabic, the scholars, had said, I think that's necessary. And people are already doing that in the English world, but it doesn't hurt to add one more person. So yeah, my impact is focused on that side of things. I won't be making videos in Arabic, and I don't think I have much of an impact on that side of the world. Though there are people who speak both Arabic and English and watch my channel as well. Um, and whether I hope that the impact of, I guess, this movement in general, or mine, or whatever, would be that most of the Middle East would stop being Muslim countries. Uh, I think I think that's, yeah, that's one of the things that I hope for eventually. Not necessarily by numbers. I feel like that is going to be an inevitable consequence, but uh, not Muslim countries in terms of secularism splitting the church and state, not having Islam be influencing not only laws but culture in every sense of the way to a negative extent. It doesn't mean that Muslims shouldn't have a culture that is, intertwined with Islam, but it means that society wouldn't, as a whole, this culture doesn't negatively impact a lot of the people within it because they're forced to be within it, if that makes sense. So yeah, that is something that I hope to see eventually, more of this freedom of religion without harming people.
Yeah, I think I was speaking to one of my, I have an Arab ex-Muslim friend as well, and we were talking about how, like, at least where he lives, being Muslim is kind of the culture. So it's like even though he's not Muslim, he wants to teach his kids Islam just so that they have an easier cultural experience just kind of wanted to add that. Sometimes, like, I guess for me, I don't really think that being an ex Muslim is always beneficial. Sometimes I think it can add more struggles to someone's life. And sometimes just being Muslim but having an alternative view is could be better for some people.
No, I agree. It's not an easy life in many of those cases. However, as a net, I think it's a net positive that those who are, it's kind of inevitable. It's not really their choice to believe or not, and they're not going to be convinced by the Muslim trying to make it make sense. I think that that state is causing them a lot more harm than whatever hardship they would face by making that transition or seeing content like mine and other people's, and just eventually coming to that conclusion that they're not crazy for not believing in Islam anymore and taking that step, of officially making it a thing. But yes, it is extremely difficult. But I think it's like, in a sense, it's like saying that it's difficult for an abused woman to leave her husband. Yeah, of course it will be, but and not that every religious person is abused, but in the cases where someone's intellect just it sees the flaws and it just cannot let them believe in the middle interpretation that they think is logically inconsistent, that state is abusive, especially given that they currently believe in all the negatives about themselves that they're told about themselves, or everyone around them keeps asserting it, or they're treated harshly. And yeah, so that's why I think it's a net positive in the end. And that's another thing. If someone comes across my content, like this is not on a state-sponsored channel, for example, like on TV, where people are just forced to sit down and watch, and this is in their face all the time. This is the kind of thing that it's easy to dismiss, just block my channel or like mute me or something like that. So it's not really going to Muslims in their spaces and forcing it on them to consume. So that's why I feel like I'm not putting those people in harm's way by making them ex-Muslim and then they go through the struggle, if that makes sense. Usually they find this, or if they come across it, they will gravitate towards it if they're the kind of person who, needs to see it or wants to see it. Yeah.
Okay, I see where you're coming from.
Mhm. And yeah, I just want to clarify for people in the comments, not that I've seen a lot of like hostile comments, but um, this has been mostly Noor wanting to pick my brains about a lot of these things. And I feel like if she didn't, if she didn't push back too hard, or like we just left it at a certain point, it doesn't mean that she agrees or supports that thing, right? Like it's just that now you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm not arguing. I mean, for my view is how the Quran says, for those that want to disbelieve, let them disbelieve. It doesn't really, for me, it's not a priority for you to for me to disprove you or anything. That's your view.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the vibe that I was getting from you, but I just wanted to make it clear because sometimes people, like even after the fact, after the stream, they'd be like, "Oh, this person won," or like he he like silenced her or something like that. That's not what's going on here. Um, and that you were asking earlier about like do I want people to leave Islam, or am I trying to convince them and so on. I hope it's clear from some of my streams where I do talk to Muslims in the context of, tell me why you believe. It's more for them to elaborate, and same as what you're doing here, which is even if I disagree, it is what it is. I might respond because I want to elaborate what I think about that, but just ending it at a certain point doesn't mean that somebody won. So I'm clarifying for the audience, not because of you.
Yeah, you're rewarded with silence, even if you are correct.
Or even if you're incorrect,
Sure,
I
yeah.
guess.
Sometimes it's just better to leave off.
Yeah, and I feel like the purpose of that interaction, like it was fulfilled, which is discussing it and the audience being aware of both points of view. And yeah, at that point that has concluded the purpose of it, because and that's what I mean by I don't like debates, is the point of a debate is to come to a conclusion about who is correct, or even the two people, for one of them to change their mind or to win in a sense. And that I don't think that's very productive, because people will be just selectively looking for the points, right? That they'd be looking for scores of he won this point, she lost that point, and so on, or she won that point and he lost that point, whatever. So yeah, just wanted to mention that. Is there anything else that was on your mind? I will take some comments that I had bookmarked, but is there anything else on your mind?
Not necessarily, no.
Okay. And there might be some questions in the comments. People feel free to ask. If Noor still has time, we'll get to them as well. So Benjamin Iota, thanks for the super chats, by the way. Ask her for examples on that. I don't remember when this was, so if you want to repeat, I might. And what is true Islam? Who said a watered down interpretation is the true Islam? Why would someone born today know more than a scholar? We've already touched on this, I think, right, Noor?
Yeah, I guess like it's all just people's opinions. I mean, I don't think there is such thing as a true Islam, and I think sometimes it's better to just get to a quote unquote good solution rather than being a solution that the scholars have said, even if it's, horrendous, because then you're just spreading facade, right?
Fasad means corruption, right, in this context?
Yeah. So just because like it might be true that you're spreading corruption doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good thing.
Okay. I don't like to say that there is a true Islam or isn't, but I maintain the position that there are problematic things that are easier to defend in Islam than to use apologetics to dismiss. And that is why that's the kind of apologetic thing that I would counter. Yeah, so just making that clear for the people watching. And let's see, next one. Oh yeah, this was a comment on, you said that a lot of Muslims say that ex-Muslims left for emotional reasons. Besides the fact that many ex-Muslims, if not the majority, have thought through to some extent and they see stuff beyond emotion. As Zaid is saying, you can convert to Islam for emotional reasons, but can't leave for emotional reasons. I pretty much agree that there's a lot of conversion stories that you see so much emotion put into, and because the story was tragic, it's beautiful to the Muslim, it's confirmation, and they don't bat an eye about, did you actually think through the arguments pro-Islam before you converted, and so on. Do you have any thoughts, Noor?
Yeah, I think that people, I mean, I'm not a convert to Islam, so I can't really resonate with the mindset of a convert or for someone who leaves Islam. But I think it's probably equally emotional for both parties.
Next comment. Oh, thank you, music guy, for the super chat. He's saying for the sleeping kitty in the background. This guy right here. I can wake him up because he wakes me up all the time. Thanks. And next one, yeah, we have Sharif Jaber to Impact the Middle East. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's an Egyptian ex-Muslim. He's pretty known in the Middle East and pretty hated in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's pretty tragic. From what I've heard, he's like arrested or something.
Yeah, he's been through legal troubles. Yeah, but I'm glad that not glad that he went through it, but I'm glad that he decided to, take that sacrifice and just open up the conversation about that. Benjamin, again, thank you. He was saying, thank you for the super chat, saying, this is a thoughtful talk, many takeaways. Thank you, Noor. So yeah, thank you, Noor. A few more comments here. And Noor, at any point, feel free to let me know if you have to go.
Yeah, probably like another maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. I might take a couple more questions after you go,
Sure.
if that's okay. But they wouldn't be about the conversation per se, or not about you really. Let's see. So Robert says, Noor, if you're comfortable, would you share your de-radicalization story? Also, what should I do if I sense someone close to me is radicalizing? Do you already have a video about this, Noor?
No, I don't, and I don't really know if I want to make a video on that. I guess I would just say, not that it's anything issue. I think that it's just like it's just my story. I don't know if many people could relate to it. It's more so that I just
not.
like. I mean, I had a very I got in trouble with authorities which I don't think most Muslims have to deal with that. And once I got in trouble with the authorities, I kind of realized, like, I'm kind of being humiliated. Maybe this isn't really what Allah wants for me. So, yeah.
Okay.
I kind of then tried to question things.
Yeah. Well, just to let you know, like, not to pressure you to make that video, but it's not always. First of all, you can't predict how many people do relate, even if it seems like such a unconventional story. But also, that's not necessarily the only way people can get benefit from it, that they can relate to it. So, something to ponder, I guess, for the future. Yeah, and then here's a comment by Zayd saying, "True Islam implies it's from God. Ex-Muslims obviously don't believe that." Yeah, what I meant by true Islam is truest to its form of conception, I guess, or how it was as the Prophet practiced it, or as Muhammad practiced it. Uh, but I think it's more complex than that because we can never verify how he actually practiced it, and there's a lot of mystery. But I go by what is it that we need to address, and usually the most defensible and at the same time problematic is the interpretation that has been canonized by scholars and things like that, and that is why I address. But yeah, if if I called it true Islam, that would mean that it is true from God. That's not what I mean. Yeah.
Also, when I use it, I think when I think people use it, it's like ijma, as if there's like a consensus that everyone agrees on, which obviously isn't true.
So I'm conflicted about ijma. So for me, often there is ijma. Like it's not unilateral. It's not like 99% or anything, but there are consensuses in a sense. And I think those are it's important to give them legitimacy and address them, right? Rather than just saying it's just another interpretation. And that's where the idea of adhering to true Islam, in my view, comes from. Um, I do have a question from Ultra. Says, does Noor believe she's surrounded by supernatural things like angels and jinn? What is your view on the supernatural?
I think the majority of times when people talk about jinn, like their interaction with people, like possessions and things like that, I don't agree with. And also, you made a video about like black magic. I think what we consider black magic and what they consider black magic is pretty different. I think black magic for them was kind of like science that they didn't understand, even if the
Mhm.
Quran talks about that.
Wait, did I make a video about black magic? I don't think so.
I think you mentioned briefly like there's like an ayah or something. It was like maybe a
Yeah.
passing.
So Surat al-Falaq, yeah. I did touch on that at some point. It wasn't like a topic of a whole video. I did think about that. وَمِن شَرِّ النَّفَّاثَاتِ فِي الْعُقَدِ. Yeah, yeah, but we're not going to get into that in a moment. So you do believe in it, but you think that a lot of what people interpret to be jinn or miracles or black magic, and not miracles, just black magic, isn't actually that. But they
Yeah,
are there.
I think a lot of the times it's like God of the gaps. They just like something they don't understand. Oh, must be a jinn.
Okay. But at the core of it, it is true. It's just not the ways that we think it manifests itself.
Um, it's not that I think it's true. I think it's just it's tolerable. I think you can believe in it without like believing too much about it.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. So, do you believe in it?
Um, I guess maybe it would depend on. I don't mind believing that there are creatures, but I don't. I think 99% of what Muslims talk about jinn is. I mean, it's not from the Quran. It's mostly false and superstitions. And angels, I mean, I don't really know. I don't really think too much about it, to be honest.
Okay. This is not to scrutinize your position on it, but um, just to give context, in my mind, that kind of position just I can't be in it because I feel like I will compulsively start thinking, no, but what is my actual conclusion? I don't have to 100% believe in one or the other, but I can't find myself in that position and remain in it. And again, that's not to scrutinize your position, but it's to point out that there are different kinds of people when it comes to a lot of issues. Like I might be this way about other things that I find to be more minor in Islam or just in life. Um, but this is what I highlight when people say, for example, disbelief is an intention or a choice. I say no, because for some people, they're able to not tackle the issues caused by the strong position of belief or disbelief in something. For others, they don't really have a choice in it. So just wanted to highlight that. Um, yeah. And I think we're at the 5 minute mark, right? That you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that seems fine to end it here.
Okay. Well, yeah, I wanted to thank you for coming on the channel today. I hope that you got all your questions answered about me and my approach, I guess.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Thank you for platforming me, and hopefully, people can come to my channel and now convert back to Islam. I'm kidding,
Well,
obviously.
yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's the thing. Like a channel like yours, I'm not like I don't mind. Like I already have the. By the way, the link is in the description. That is her channel. Yeah, I wouldn't mind it even if someone does convert back to Islam, because I feel like if after starting from this position, because I feel like you just can't go back to the harmful interpretation. So if they do it your way, it's good enough for me. Yeah,
Well, thank you for having me.
yeah. Thanks for being here. Talk to you later. Bye bye. All right. So there are a few questions that now I can't see a lot of them. There's one question that somebody asked me about. Am I going to chat with David Wood? So I'm going to address that in a second. But if anyone else has any questions, like a quick Q&A before we go, I'll give it some time as well. So let me start by, yeah, first of all, lots of comments. This was an interactive stream. I tried to take as many comments as I could, but some streams are not meant to be just the two people taking questions, if you know what I mean, especially given the time constraints. I would have wanted like to allow people to ask Noor more questions, but unfortunately we ran out of time for her. Yeah, and not every stream is going to be a completely interactive stream. So I'll get to this question first. Do you have a dog or planning on getting one? No, I don't, and no, I don't. If it happened to be that I am with someone who really, really wants a dog, and we've understood or discussed my do's and don'ts around it, or what I'm comfortable with, not really as in commanding them to act a certain way, but what I'm uncomfortable with dogs and so on, then it's plausible. But I personally wouldn't go out of my way and get a dog. um, how do you plan to raise your kids in the future in terms of religion? So if I do have kids, I would tell them about, it has to do with the poll that I've pinned, by the way. I would I would teach them about the histories of religion in general. I was watching this documentary on Netflix about a tomb in Egypt that was discovered not too long ago. And their religious beliefs it struck me as interesting that everyone, or most of the people working on this tomb, like trying to uncover things and trying to understand what the murals, or I guess the hieroglyphics on the wall meant, and the story behind all that. They were trying to understand the religious story, right? And they were repeating it, and they weren't dismissive in any way, but that they don't believe that it's true. Things like the ancient Egyptians put a lot of emphasis in the afterlife, and they were trying to preserve themselves and some of their things, or so on, for the afterlife. But it struck me as bizarre that the person talking about this would just go and pray afterwards in their worldview, and not think about how, in many ways, their worldview is very different. Sorry, is very similar, except it's kind of absurd and abstract, and just a retelling when it comes to the ancient Egyptians for them. So I think I would start from the beginning. I would teach my children about the first initial ideas about religions, and not just the 3 or 4 most common ones. And because I think that context is important. And then if at the end of the day they believe that there is a God, then nothing I could do about that. But I wouldn't be obviously, like, I'm not going to teach them there is a God, but one of these religions is correct. I would tell them no one actually knows except for the people making the assertions or claiming that they do know. Um, yeah, thank you. Let's see what else. What's with the dog hate here? Not really hate or anything. I understand the appeal with dogs. It's just, first of all, they're too energetic. I'm not gonna be able to keep up and, like, take them for the walks that they deserve. It's just I am not gonna be able to be a good dog dad, I guess. So I know my limitations, and I'm not gonna overexert myself just to have a dog. So, yeah. Are you paid by Israel? Uh, they're a little behind on their paychecks, but, theoretically, yeah. Um, have you read Aqidah fiqh books and developed doubts? No. So my doubts are bigger than specific rulings. Um, and they weren't doubts in the beginning. They were just questions about the inconsistency of something as prevalent as believing that, you know, it's the most basic one that disbelievers are intentionally disbelieving and they deserve hell for it, or that God wants worship so much that he would he would torture for it, but simultaneously it's claimed that God doesn't need it. So there's a discrepancy there. Then why would he torture for it? That doesn't seem like a perfect God thing for him to do. So no, I didn't delve into the specifics of fiqh. And by the point that, like, I was too far gone. My faith was too far gone because I couldn't justify it anymore. There was no point in delving in these fiqh rulings to critique them or something. That wasn't really an interest of mine. But when there was a fiqh issue or another, I would try to read as much as possible the apologetic points and whatever other interpretations before I come to a conclusion. Um, have you got a clear goal for your channel yet, or are you still feeling your way? If yes, can you share a little about it with us? No clear goal, I think. What I've been doing so far, what I talked about in the stream about what I hope to achieve, that's vaguely where I'm headed. And I readjust with each experience. Like, for example, I didn't expect to be doing a lot of those dissecting apologetic live streams or live streams in general, or discussions with Muslims and so on. I was expecting to do more videos, and I still want to. It's just that they're more time consuming, and sometimes for many reasons this might be more productive in other ways. But yeah, so to answer you, not exactly very 100% clear about goals, and I don't want to conflicted about setting goals, because I don't want to set milestones or goals and then be disappointed when they're not met. But I have a direction that I'm headed in. Cats are not all that. Get the hell off of my stream. I'm just kidding. Thank you. Secular Spirit is here. Go check out his channel, by the way, and our last stream together on his channel. He says, question for you. I have a 16-year-old friend in my hood who's Muslim. He knows I'm an ex-Muslim, but does not know how critical of Islam I am. Is it wrong to share my experiences when he is that young? Interesting. I would avoid the topic. And if he keeps bringing it up, then I would tell him, look, to be honest, I don't have favorable views of this of this religion, and my opinion would be contrary to yours. And I'd rather not discuss that with you at this stage, because I don't know, you could be less direct than this, but something along the lines of, because I don't want to influence your views, or because I don't want to bring it into my personal life, or something like that. And, you know, maybe promise him in the future we might revisit this topic again, or something along those lines. It's kind of blurry, because do you draw the line at 18? I don't think so. I think even if they were 18, I would still have that approach. I would still have that approach in my personal life in general. But I feel like once they've reached a point of somewhat maturity, like 18 is still a very vulnerable time. Maybe a few years after that, I don't know. It really depends on the person too. You could just ignore my advice, and if they're, you know, that kind of forward-thinking person who is very eager to talk to you about it, then, you know, do what you think is best. This is possible. I'm not going to dismiss that yet. Is that a prophecy? Are you going to cash in on that later? I don't know. In your bad moments, in your moments of doubts, have you ever felt like you betrayed your people or your faith? Of course, yeah. In like, before I've reached the point where I'm at today, yeah. I did have those thoughts, like a lot of ex-Muslims do. It's like, what are you doing? Like you committed, as they put it, treason. Treason against your people, against what are you doing with all this? So yeah, it's normal. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to go through it, but if you go through it, it's fine, and realize that it's not God beaming messages into your head to make you go back or something. Um, Thanks for being open enough to talk to Noor. Well, nothing to thank me for. I'm actually the one who commented on her channel once and invited her. Yeah. So a couple more questions, and but I'll get to this one that Zagros has asked earlier in the stream. Are you considering having a conversation with DW, David Wood? So the context of that is, I made a silly 12-minute video last week or something, where I shared my thoughts on. It was kind of a joke. The title was "Exposing Apostate Prophet." I almost said Apostate. Exposing Apostate Prophet and David Wood. And the intention with that title is because I wanted the people. There's people from both sides of the aisle who just keep saying, like, I'm taking inspiration or copying a lot of what they do, and it's not that it bothered me, but I feel like I just wanted to put an answer out there. And first, I started by talking about Apostate Prophet and how I feel about his contributions and his content and so on. And it wasn't inflammatory for either of those people, by the way. Like, I hope people do go beyond the title. But for David Wood, it was more of a critical, not really critical of him, as I've made it clear. I am not making an assessment of who the person is, and that's not to say I think he's a good person. I don't want to call him bad. No, I'm just not going to comment on the kind of person that he is or something. But my commentary was my exposure to David Wood, and as a doubting Muslim or ex-Muslim, a fresh ex-Muslim, and how that impact that he would have on that he had on me, it didn't last for me very long, but it could for other people. So it wasn't a commentary to say he needs to change his approach and how he criticizes Islam, because I know that his goals and mine are different, and whatever he is doing for his goals, I'm not going to tell him how to do it. But I was talking about how that impacts us, and that brings, there's a lot of positives to that, to me talking about it. But anyway, I wish I made it even more explicit and nuanced, but I think a lot of people did get my point. The people who are pissed off were just fans of that person. Not that I dismiss everyone who disagrees, fans of the opposite, but it was clear that they were just displeased with me in general. And sorry, I haven't gotten to the question yet, but it's important to know the context. I got a lot of demeaning comments from a lot of the Christians who were unhappy about it. And I just noted how, they didn't really get to me at this point. I'm pretty resilient after, a lot of what I've been through from the other side of the aisle. But especially that it feels a lot less personal, knowing that it wasn't even about, like when a Muslim does it, at first it felt more personal than it feels now. But when a Christian does it, it's even less personal to me. It's like, this person doesn't even know anything about my beliefs. They haven't heard me out. And they start accusing me of being not empathetic, biased towards Islam, which I disagree with. I was saying it's just that I try to be more reasonable and empathetic towards the people, and I'm saying things as they are. So they keep relaying things like Islam, taqiyya, everyone wants to kill you, they just don't tell you, and things like that. Anyhow, that's all context. So to answer the question, are you considering having a conversation with David Wood? I don't think so. First of all, this wasn't an attack, for example, for him to be like, and this is my response, and then I'll be like, okay. No, it's just me saying this is how it impacted me and how it might impact others. Like, FYI, there's other options. You don't have to just, listen to that and just, that's it. And so what would be the point of the talk? Because I'm not trying to get him to change his approach, because I'm not even sure if that's going to happen. And that would be kind of aiding him in whatever his goals are, however defined or undefined they are. I don't care. He can do his own thing. I am not going to limit the potential harm that he causes, because he's not going to change his approach for me. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's just me giving commentary on something. It doesn't mean that something needs to be done about it, and I have to participate in that something being done about it. And sometimes it comes with negative effects on me and my channel, like when it was flooded with comments like that. I don't want those people to linger around. Like, even if they do have a more favorable view of me, it's the underlying reason for support and things like that. I don't want support from the wrong people. So, not to say that anyone who watches David Wood is the wrong supporter, or anyone who's a Christian is the wrong supporter, but there will be an influx of people, even if their hearts have softened towards me, the underlying issues are still there. I don't want that. Yeah, so that's it. Like, there was no like bad blood or anything that I need to talk out, if that makes sense. Let's see. What are your thoughts about the overall discussions? Did you have more questions for her? I think the discussion with Noor went very well. And did I have more questions for her? I am curious about, for example, my classic line of questioning of why do you believe that Islam is the truth? But it wasn't the topic of this stream, and I feel like it would be, first of all, there's no time, and it would be counterproductive to delve into very differing things. If we want to get as much benefit from today's stream. I don't know the context of this, but it's funny. I get paid $11.50 an hour by Israel to be in YouTube comment section and talk about my armpits. Let's see, next comment. I don't know if this is a joke or not. The dog hate is the Muslim in you speaking, Ala-ad-Din. But relating to the previous topic about, the influx of people accusing me of being sympathetic to Islam, I got a lot of these comments like, why do you read Quran in Arabic? Are you secretly a da'wah Muslim or something? That's a da'wah language. Can't escape your fitrah. Let's see. Have you read Kitab al-Masahif? Yeah, Kitab al-Masahif. No, I have not. I can't even promise that I will, to be honest. There's so many things on my plate right now. Let's see. More comments. There's a lot of comments, and I'll try to get to some of them before I call it a day. Because I do like answering these questions. It might be harder for you to fish through my content to find the answers, Let's see. Robert says, when I was in Catholic school, I was desperate for an older person to admit to me that they have doubts in their religion. I think that is very comforting. A very good example of that is Hassan al-Adwan, seeing that not only it's not that he has authority because he's older, it's that he's presenting things in a rational, mature way that gives a lot of people comfort, realizing this is not just a juvenile, immature, rebellious line of thinking, as many believers like to put it, as if it's a phase or something. Even if they don't, the person doubting doesn't agree with that, it's more comforting to know that no, people have matured past that, and reasonable people do agree. And I've always maintained this position. Perhaps Islam is true, as conflicting as it is. God decided that this is the perfect religion, yet there's so much room for disagreement among honest people. That is what makes it not only unlikely, but pretty much not like guaranteed to not be from God. Because for these two things to be consistent, which is God is fair and wise and all that, and all knowing, and that there are these traps that will cause people to disbelieve honestly, they can't both happen at the same time. So is God deceptive, or is everything he's telling us about his method of judgment misunderstood? Then that would mean, again, that God is incapable of expressing himself. So yeah. In relation to the conversation of the 16-year-old, it's too late to wait until then. You don't have to wait till they're 25. But yeah, I acknowledge not all 16-year-olds are the same. Anf-Boo says, I wonder if there's one critique that makes you feel really upset. In what sense? So sometimes I'm upset not because it got to me, but because it's upsetting that someone would behave that way. if that makes sense. That I know it is getting to other people. That um, it's such a good like insult or critique, not good as in it has merit, but it's good at looking like it has merit, or it's good at hijacking preconceived notions or something like that. So yeah, it does happen every now and then that I'm like, damn, this is going to be easy for someone to repeat ignorantly, and it will be repeated again and again. It's like a virus that spreads when at the core of it, it is not true. And I'm sure there's examples of these the other way around, like again, alluding to the kind of commenters who would just keep repeating false things about Islam. Um, yeah. So anyway, yeah. So there are comments like these. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but that's the gist of it. Um, at what age do you feel people should talk about LGBT issues in schools? Interested in everyone's view. I don't know. I don't have a number for it, but issues, I don't know, because that's more complicated than just mentioning, hey, some people are attracted to the same gender, and they have the right to get married, and it happens. That's it. I feel like that could be introduced from a very young age, just like you introduce people to the idea that straight couples are straight couples. Um, but to talk about the history and the implications of the suffering and like the laws and all that, I don't know. That relates to, when do you talk about racism, for example? You would mention to children, hey, don't treat somebody differently because they have a different skin color, or then you would start elaborating more when they get older. So that's yeah. So yeah, that's what I think about that. Um, yeah. So about David Wood, I want to move on with the comments, but I think this is a good one. He's not an ex-Muslim. How do his views impact the ex-Muslim community? So what I was talking about there is, first of all, we get conflated with him, even though people like Muslims know he's not ex-Muslim. We get lumped in as in you're all doing the same thing, which is anti-Islam, when there's a lot more to it than that. And I've expressed how our goals are different and so on, and how our views are extremely different, and where we're coming from is extremely different, literally and metaphorically. Um, and how they affect us is not only through negative image and negative association, and not only that, but it's easy to be hostile or apprehensive of us, even by questioning Muslims or ex-Muslims themselves, when they see that this is the prevalent, the opposing view to da'wah, for example, or the opposing view to Islam is this hostile and this antagonistic. They feel like they're being attacked too, so they're left in between, or they have to cling harder, as difficult as it is, to the Muslim side, even if it is harming them. So that's one way that it harms the ex-Muslim community, even though he's not ex-Muslim. Are you going to talk to Hatun Tash? I'm guessing that's Hatun Tash. No, and a lot of people ask me a lot of questions like, are you going to talk to this person? Are you going to interview this person? A lot of them are interesting people, or their channels are great. I'm not saying that about Hatun specifically. I don't really watch her stuff. I just know about the stabbing incident, if that's the same Hatun, which I think it is. But more often than not, I want to ask, but it's going to sound kind of condescending or rude. What's the benefit of that talk? Like, what am I hoping to achieve with that talk? There might be a benefit eventually. Like, there might be something that's not on my mind, but more often than not, if somebody's going to ask me that, I would like them just for my benefit to tell me about, are you going to talk to them about this and that? So I don't see why this kind of conversation would be beneficial, or at least, high on my radar at the moment. Let's see. Yeah, that's what I find funny, when someone's like, Islam is a satanic cult. I'm like, okay, you're wrong even within the religious worldview, because what? The idea being that they're all deceived by Satan and Muhammad is some kind of Satan. And I'm like, you're just one crazy replacing it with another crazy, that kind of, being that far out there. Uh, what's next? Oh, Skywork says, wasn't thanking you for being open enough to talk Apostle al-Din. Was thanking Noor for engaging with you. Okay. Already respecting your interaction. Well, thank you. Yes, that credit goes to Noor. Yes. Yeah. Sorry if I saw it that way. I hope that's not like too egotistical or anything. Now I feel bad about that. I don't remember what the wording of it was. Uh, duh, duh, duh. Yes. Do you think proselytizing is problematic? At the core of it, if someone is proselytizing and I think the core idea is harmful or has a lot of potential for harm, then of course I think it's problematic. But there's degrees to that. Like, do I think it's problematic and I want to stop it, or and I will not necessarily stop it, but dissuade against it, like actively in a hostile way? There's a lot of degrees to it. Um, Dawah can be considered, it is proselytizing, and apologetics are proselytizing. There's a lot of different flavors to it. But my opposition in the recent context was um, that proselytizing in a space like this, I frown upon. I'm not going to delete comments that do that, but I want them to know that not only do I disagree with it, if people are being hostile towards that kind of thing, I'm not going to tell them to stop, because they have the right to, like, they can't lash out against most people. They shouldn't be lashing out against innocent people or Muslims or someone who's like just caught in the crossfire. But I'm not encouraging them to lash out on proselytizers, but if they will, if they don't like that advertisement, after they've just left a religion, this bold person is like, hey, here's this other cult instead. Of course, they might not like that. So I want people who are going to proselytize to know, not only is it falling on deaf ears, not only is it not welcome by me or a lot of the people who watch me, not only do I think it's harmful, but the effects are probably going to be negative. And, you know, yeah. Thank you, Skyworks. I appreciate that. I've developed a reading method utilizing psychological concepts and such as schemas and applied behavior analysis. It's way more accurate than psychic readings. Can I do a reading for you? That sounds very interesting. I'm a little apprehensive of kind of I don't know why I'm apprehensive. Not because I think you might get it right, but more like I haven't thought that through. So I will think about that. Commentary on this: Abdul is accepted term by Muslims themselves. Oh, this is one of the commenters who was like happy to lay into me after that David Wood video. It's a term by Muslims themselves. They all claim they are Abdul of Allah. So first of all, the way that you're saying it, Abdul, that is very indicative that you're not only are you not from the in group, you still don't understand it. Abdul something, yeah, means slave of something or servant of something, or in this case, like, yeah, a worshiper, slave of Allah. And I talked about how that is like ridiculous that Allah is so happy with this idea of whatever version of slavery this is to him, or submitting to him. It's pretty egotistical. I mean, your God, you're Christian, your God is also pretty obsessed with the whole like worshiping thing, even if he doesn't call you a slave. However, that term is usually used in a derogatory way, and sometimes it has racist connotations. I'm not saying everyone who uses it has that in mind, but it's just easier to avoid the term than to use it that way. And it's always meant in a hostile, mocking way. I don't see the benefit of it. I mean, I for example, when it's used, the way that it's used, even if you replace that word with Muslims, often it's still kind of derogatory in general. For example, if I said, not me, if someone commented, what else do you expect from a Muslim? That's not the kind of comment I would say. I mean, maybe if I really lost my cool, I hope not. Or if it's very specifically, it actually does apply. But in general, if you say, what would you expect from an ex-Muslim, or what do you expect from a kafir, from a murtad, do you see how ugly that is? So usually Abdul is used in that way. So that's why I don't like that word. Even if they're saying, well, technically they are Abdul something. So I just wanted to clarify that. It's like if, like, a lot of African Americans in the context of the US, for example, they use the N word, right, in their music and stuff. And I have my feelings about that. But does that mean that I can say it and I say, see, they use it? Like they use the N word? No, because usually it has negative connotations. Now, there's a lot more to be said about what if I'm singing it or something, but I'm not going to delve into that. Don't infer any beliefs of mine. What's your opinion on schools with an Islamic ethos and clearly displaying religious attire on their website? Thanks. So I feel similarly about like Christian Catholic schools and things like that, though they are even more secular than Islamic schools usually ever are. How I feel about that is related to how I feel about indoctrinating children into beliefs early on. I don't like that. That's not to say that I'm campaigning against it. It's just that's a headache that I'm not gonna get into really. But yeah, not really pro that, not thrilled about it because it sets up an environment of, look, this is what everyone is. You need to conform before you've even realized what the hell it is you're conforming to, or even on a surface level, what you're culturally conforming to that later you might develop to have to defend or feel like you're, forced to conform to in the fullest sense. Um, let's see. I'm not nuts. I've established my practice already. I've done readings for, yeah, no, it's not that I think you're nuts. Oh, I guess some comments were calling you nuts. I don't know enough just reading from the comments to, say anything at the moment. I don't know what that is. Red Judaism and say Jojo sent you. Again, I ask you, who is this person that I would talk to and why am I trying to talk to them? What am I benefiting here? Let's see. No, I disagree with that. I don't know the position of this person, but often I hear this from Muslims saying, no, slave doesn't mean slave. Slavery was different, not the U.S. kind of slavery. And I think that's like, I don't know, whitewashing slavery in many ways. And the specifics may not be the same, but it's not that it's that much less ugly or that it's less ugly at all. That's a whole other discussion. Let's see. There's a lot of hostility towards the not a tarot card reader. No, it was the person who psychoanalyzes you and stuff. Yeah. Anyhow, I'll take a couple more comments before I go. If you have any more, if I missed anything, feel free to repeat it. And then I will call it a stream. Sometimes I see a comment that I really can't put on screen or whether I disagree with it or not. So, don't feel bad if you're missed out or maybe there's no time. I'd love to watch a stream between you and Hisham Nostik. So again, I'd like to ask you what it is that you hope to get out of that conversation. There's a lot of ex-Muslims and non-ex-Muslims that I do want to talk about. Not talk about, sorry. Do want to talk with. But either I have nothing concrete, like what, I don't want to have a discussion where I'm like, so tell me about your story of how you left Islam. That's kind of, it is relevant sometimes, but it can get pretty repetitive and boring and not super helpful, especially if they're already talked about it to a much wider audience. So I'd like to know, like, what is it that either of us or the audience would benefit from that kind of discussion? I only heard about this not too long ago, and I think it's perpetuated by people like Christian Prince and otherwise. The idea that Allah is a moon god, I don't think it's that solid of a theory based on what little I know of it, but I don't necessarily have to have an opinion on these things. But what I did find interesting, so sometimes I make these connections about how, for example, Islam is against polytheism, right? And how could there be more than one God? Except because how could a God not conflict with another God? One of them has to be more supreme and so on. Except there are religions or mythology religions that actually have a way around this, which is a main God, an all-powerful God, and then demigods, as they call them, if I'm pronouncing that right, like specialized little gods with a small g. And that is an answer to the whole, like, how does polytheism make sense from an Islamic point of view or from the point of view of monotheism? And in Islam, there's the concept of the angel of rain and the angel of death, which are demigods, right? They're doing something supernatural beyond the realm of the seen, beyond in the metaphysical, as they like to call it. They have some godlike abilities, and they're just not called gods, so it's not polytheism. But there's a lot of these borrowed elements from other religions and cultures at the time. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's some truth to something about that, but it's explicitly said in Islam that I think it was Prophet Ibrahim, don't quote me on this one, but he was wondering if the moon is God and then if the sun is God, and it's explicitly said it's not. But whether it could have started as a mutation of that, I don't know. But the word Allah predates Islam, so maybe the theory is that they used to call that the moon. I don't know. Let's see. What is the feeling Salah gives you? Because Salah gives me a special feeling. Nothing really, like, because I know it's not actually a connection with God, so nothing. Let's see. So when is the Muslimah coming? Oh, you missed it. I'm just taking a few questions, so a lot of questions, I guess, before I go. But yeah, I'll try to get to some more, and then that's it. Lulu says, you think the conversation will be enjoyable? Yeah, but I'd like to know, what would it be about? What's the topic? Because sometimes I'm out of creativity, and I don't know what it is that you think he's good at, for example, or he has experience with that I or the audience could benefit from. So pointers will be appreciated. Do you think it's productive to always adopt a civil approach when it comes to communicating with Muslims? I find that when you remain civil, you limit yourself because you're prioritizing other person's feelings. So here's the thing. This is me talking for speaking for myself only. If my goals or my approach, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but if I were doing the kind of debating thing and other types of conversations, then there's more to it than just always being civil and like standing your ground, but not really pushing or anything like that. But in the context of what I do, if the conversation turns to that point, then it's no longer productive for my goals, and for the benefit of the audience on both sides. And at that point, why resort to being uncivil? Now, I'm not perfect, and I might fall into that at some point, or I might have already. I don't think it's been that bad yet, but I hope it never is. So in the context of what I do know, I don't think it's ever civil to go there. And it's not really about because I care about their feelings. No, wait, it is. It is. If they're saying something so outrageous and so hateful, then I don't care about their feelings. But that's when the conversation stops being productive. Though, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud. Though I can continue having the conversation with them, and now the goals are different, but I can still benefit from not reflecting everything back at them the same way. I don't have to be friendly with them, but that doesn't mean being uncivil. I could be harsh. I could be pointed with my remarks. I can even be a little mocking or whatever, but I think it remains within the bounds of civility to some extent. So it really depends. Thank you, Bilal Ali. Ex-Muslims break their own shackles. Power to us. Power to you, everyone. Thanks for the super chat. Couple more that I will read. Movie recommendations, honestly, none on my mind right now. I like to watch shorter. I used to like to watch documentaries, but now I just can't sit through one. So shorter things that are informative, and I just retain just a little bit of them. So my interests change every week, pretty much. Jackknife says, next video topic. So hopefully if I can get done editing it, there's a video about a miracle. And I don't want to give out too much. It's not about an Islamic miracle that people use to argue for Islam per se, but it is an Islamic miracle and what I think about it. And then I'm going to have a stream right after the video premieres about discussing that. So hopefully that's next. And there is a conversation that I had from TikTok randomly with a Mexican Muslim convert. I think, sorry, I don't want to presume that he's Mexican, but his name is Juan, and he might actually be in the US. So not necessarily Mexican, sorry, but someone called Juan, who I think has a Latino background. If Mexicans do accept being called from a Latino background, I'm not sure. And yeah, I'm going to post that at some point. And let's see. Yeah, here's a verse that disproves the idea that that Allah is the moon. It explicitly says, don't pray to the moon. How do you speak such good English? No offense. Oh, no offense. Of course. Yeah, thank you. I picked up a lot of it from people who do speak English with less of an Arabic accent than myself, and a lot of it from movies. When I was younger, I did pick up a lot of it from the movies. Um, this is a nice idea, but I haven't had time or energy, to be honest, to set something like this up, to have a chat casually with fans. I do. Well, first of all, I don't like the word fans. I'm sorry. I don't want fandom. I do want people to follow me and interact with my stuff. But yeah, um, no, it feels not that it is, but it feels a little too self-indulgent. Like, hey, here's your chance to talk to me. And no, maybe in the future I'll have some space, but it feels like now I need to moderate and take care of that space when I'm gone as well, like a Discord for people to hang out. Somebody told me this idea, but I just can't do it. Um, but yeah, on some of my streams, I'd say like ex-Muslims call in or something. I have a few of those planned already for Muslim women specifically to call in and ex-Muslim women specifically to call in, and then just more open streams. So the downside is they have to put themselves out there, but at least with their voice. But yeah, the closest thing to fighting that I've heard Alauddin say is "Listen, akhi," something like that. Yeah, no, I don't want to recall or retell some old stories as if like I'm trying to get this person back at the moment. Uh, yeah, I maintain that it doesn't mean that you'll always have to see a conversation through to the end. That's not always productive. Sometimes it's a waste of your time and everyone else's time. So sometimes it's just worth ditching the conversation, even if it means that the other person's gonna and even if they have followers, are gonna nag you about it. Like I keep coming in and out of Twitter and deactivating my account every now and then because I realized it's not a positive space for me to be in. It's just repetitively so taxing. And I myself find myself gravitating towards either responding to that kind of thing or whenever I do initiate anything, whenever I tweet anything, it just invites all of that somehow. So to keep myself away, I deactivate it every now and then I have to activate it to make sure that it's still on, and then I have to use it for a few days because it doesn't let me leave again. But I've heard that apparently the rumor is that I was like bullied off of Twitter by this one guy who, if he's watching, hey, stop watching my videos. It's pretty sad at this point. But no, it's just for my own peace of mind, and I get a lot more benefit by not being there. But my point is, don't worry too much about how it looks. I feel like what matters more is the truth, and what matters more is your well-being. So the conversation is if the person is disingenuous and there's not even benefit, it's not possible to continue the conversation for the benefit of the onlookers, then it's perfectly fine to just end it there. Uh, yeah. One last question. And then I'll go. Oh, by the way, he says there's Latino and Hispanic, depends on where you come from. Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to make assumptions about that person. Oh yeah, that's okay. That's the thing. They think that Mando dude kicked me out. Yeah, that's the thing is here's how I feel, like since someone brought up his name. Here's how I feel about this person. I extended an invitation to him. If you don't know who it is, don't look up. You can end the stream here, and you're not going to miss out on much. I extended an invitation to him a few months ago to have a conversation offline, even like whatever, cameras off, just a mic, not recorded, or a live stream if he chooses so, whatever, or just a recorded one that we can then publish, whatever it is, just because he takes this position of he claims that he's doing this to humanize Muslims, but his whole approach is dehumanizing ex-Muslims. It's constantly stalking and repeating and commenting on every single kind of tweet that comes out of a group of people, or any vocal ex-Muslims. And I thought of it as, okay, it's just noise. It's background noise. I feel sad for that person. I I wish he would stop, but I can't force him to stop, especially that he comes to my and other channels with alternate accounts, and it's been proven by other people, and I'm just not going to delve into that. But whatever the case may be, I just thought background noise, just ignore it. The problem is though, there is actual harm there. Like there's not necessarily to me, like my mental health has hardened like after the first exposures. It's been a year now. Um from day one, like though, him and other people have been after me, and he's one of the sources of that, one of the main sources of that. I remember when I had that discussion with friendly ex-Muslim Abdullah Samir. It was my first exposure to having some kind of interview or my voice online, and I called myself Alauddin just almost randomly, and I found the name ironic. And they fixated on me saying I have like a mushaf, like multiple mushafs, and I have them here in my bookshelf. Um, I call them mushafs when one of them is called Tafsir Muyassar and the other one is the English exegesis, and both of them are tafsirs, exegesis, but they have literally the same pages of the Quran, just on a smaller scale, like just right there. Um, and they just, which, all to say, I was technically correct about that they are mushafs, like pages of the Quran, but they just, him and other people just kept tweeting stuff about how he doesn't even know what a Quran is called, which is, it's technically incorrect to call this a Quran at all. Or he didn't call it a tafsir. And at first this kind of thing got to me, but then realizing that he was the source of so much negativity, that he directed so much hateful traffic towards me, not only towards me, but towards anyone who is interacting with my content. They get the negative interactions too. So the harm is not just, if I can tolerate it, then it's not just that that's fine because I can tolerate it. It's causing harm to other people. He is perpetuating these negative views of ex-Muslims in general. Such an awful, awful personality. But I still wanted to reach out to him. I still said, look, if this is truly stemming from your belief that we're doing harm to Muslims by talking about whatever it is, the topic, then come and tell me what I'm doing wrong so I can just, let's have a discussion. Tweets are never going to do it. It's always a kind of a competition, for who gets more likes, more retweets, that kind of thing. And the whole like ratio thing that, people online are obsessed with. And he refused. His tone changed for like half a minute. He was like, "Oh, I appreciate that." And he softened a little bit. He's like, "No, but I don't want to. I'm not comfortable with it." And I didn't belittle him for it. I said, "Look, you can't just keep going on and on and on for a year and not even accept a conversation offline." And he still said no. And I'm like, you know what? I'll leave it at that. And he's still like, the next day he was making hateful comments about me, or just simply agreeing with them and enabling them, and harping on the whole like, oh, Apostle Saladin is gay thing, when I've already addressed that before. So point is, there's always going to be those kind of like trolls online, and sometimes it's worth it to make a video about it, expose him, all that stuff, show you how horrible of a person he's being, show you how he's causing harm with receipts, and sometimes it's not worth the energy because you can focus on other things. And that's the approach that I took. So whatever noise is going on Twitter, I'm glad I don't have to be exposed to that. I don't have to go through the process of seeing it, feeling a negative emotion, dismissing the negative emotion, and so on. I could just ignore all of that altogether. So yeah, so that's my little tangent about that. Say hi, Apu. He's cleaning mode. Thank you for the super chat, and says, listen, Akhi, or listen, Habibi, you have to go. Yeah, so Akhi, Habibi, thank you everybody for being here, for sticking out till the end of the stream of me just rambling on. And I won't be doing this often, right? I want to stick to the topic of the stream with the guest, but I figured, what the hell? There were a lot of questions. Why not? Yeah, so there's a poll here that I had put, and I'm ending it right now. I will share the results with you. So, is it beneficial for schools, to teach courses about the history of many religions? 41% of people said yes, and the courses would be optional. 37% said yes, and they'd be mandatory or core courses, something like math or English or something like that, or history. Though in many places, history and geography and things like that are not mandatory. 11% said no, and undecided or 8% are view results. So yeah, I did this poll on my community tab as well, and on Twitter. So we'll see what the results are. Anyhow, thanks again, music guy, for moderating and always being here and getting the cat treats, I guess. And yeah, please like and subscribe and all that stuff, everybody. Or even if you don't like what I said, express why in the comments. And even if you do like it, express why in the comments. So yeah, thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate you being here. And as always, think critically and think for yourself.